It's strange to be at this point in a career where you are looking towards going to sit on the porch versus that kind of run towards tenure and the run through the entire academic career. And so it turns your head around a little bit. So to hear that there's been some impact of all this work that's been done along the way just warms my heart. I thank you for the tribute, but I also thank you for continuing on, because I am going to go sit on my porch. So I need to know that there are other people who are carrying it on. I think my task today, at least at this point, is to introduce the panel and then to ask some questions and facilitate some conversation about what they need to tell us about voices of diversity here at UIUC. And then I'll spend maybe, I think this is the way it's supposed to go, correct me if I'm wrong, that I'll spend about 20 minutes, 25 minutes talking about some of these notions that I'm sure will be brought up here. The fact that I can almost prepare a talk knowing what they're going to say is its own testament to the kind of enduring nature of the struggle of recruitment and retention and teacher diversity. And then I'm hoping at the end of all of that, there might be some time to talk about specific strategies. And I'll rely on you to ask questions about what you want to know relative to very specific strategies about recruitment and retention. Because if you came here to think about specific strategies, you'll have to do that thinking. I'm here to talk today about what's under those strategies. Because all too often we start with the strategy without thinking about what's underneath. And I think that's the part of the problem, why we struggle with recruitment and why we really don't retain well. That's probably the larger issue. And so I want to talk about what's underneath there and the ways in which we've got to sort of reform or rethink our own practice, but also these institutions in ways that actually make a home for a place where someone can be cared for in this space. So that's what we'll talk about at the end. Sound good? Okay. So let me introduce folks. This is my first time meeting them too, so I'm going to embellish and flourish and add things. I might change their names and do all kinds of stuff. But I'm not sure the order, so let me just introduce, maybe if you could sort of raise your hand and you'll know who everybody is. So we'll start with Michael Diaz, JD. All right then. Received an a Master's of Education and a BA from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a JD from Loyola University School of Law. Currently, he is the Executive Associate Director and Title IX Coordinator. I had to really work at that Roman numeral right there. For the Office of Access and Equity at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Before that, he worked with Illinois Department of Finance and Professional Regulation, Division of Banking, as the Director of Division's Legal Department. So, welcome. I can't wait to hear what everyone's going to say. Georgina Lozano is a graduating senior, so she's still here, majoring in Learning and Education Studies with a concentration in educational equality and cultural understanding. After graduation, Georgina will be pursuing her master's in college student personnel administration at Illinois State University with an assistantship in the Dean of Students Fraternity and Sorority Life. Welcome to you too. Victoria, or Tories, is it Susbury? Yes, Susbury is a junior. She's also here. Okay, a junior in elementary ed, yes. She plans to pursue a doctoral degree in educational psychology with a focus on children's cognitive processes, specifically in relation with their literacy development. So, Tori, welcome. Yeah. And Ariel Brown is a Ph.D. candidate in counseling psych. Her research interests include stereotype threat among Black women, Black racial identity attitudes, and academic achievement and well-being among Black women. Clinically, she applies a social justice approach when providing psychological services. So that's a lovely sort of group of students who come to us from multiple kinds of disciplines as well. And so I think you were sent a series of questions that might be asked of you. So these are not, they've had time to think about them a little bit. You haven't heard them, so let me start with the first one. And I'm hoping that you will all sort of respond in turn. So what attracted you, and I think this is an important question for all institutions, what attracted you to attend this particular university, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and major in your specific area within the College of Ed? So maybe we'll start, can we start with you at the end there? Ariel, and move this way.
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Probably have to turn that on. And maybe I have to turn this off, I don't know. We might start beeping again or something. Are they on?
Yeah, they're on. It's on? Oh, I think I just turned mine off. Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Can you all hear me now? No.
Let's see what's going on here.
They're on.
I would say you might not want me to touch anything because I kill technology. I kill technology.
I was told these would just work, so.
Well, you could use mine.
Does that work? Maybe.
Yeah, we can just hand it off.
Sorry.
Mine works just fine. Why don't we just send that now? Yeah, please do. I have a large enough voice for this. Please do tweet. It's my new thing. So I'm very excited to read what you all are going to tweet about. So it's hashtag equity UIUC. Okay, and if I didn't see stuff, I'll tweet back later. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Great.
So what brought you here? What brought you to your major?
Okay, great. So my area right now is counseling psychology. I'm in the counseling psychology Ph.D. program. And I really had to decide in undergrad between clinical psychology or counseling psychology. And the thing that actually pulled me to counseling psychology, particularly this program here, was the diversity sensitive approach, right? It was embedded throughout the curriculum. Even when I spoke with Dr. Neville on the phone, who's my advisor, she talked about it in her work, and it was something that I wanted to pursue. Like I said, stereotype threat was really important to me, particularly among Black individuals and Black women. So I was like, I think I can do this here. And not to mention, it was accredited by APA, which really, really helps with landing jobs and other things like that. And the funding was nice, and I think that was the main deciding factor, because we have to eat, right? And so I was like, okay, well, I think that this program, it seems like it's sound in the professionalism that it will provide as far as, and even the education. My advisor will be Black, and she'll be able to understand what it's like to be a woman in this academy and how to navigate these things. I don't have to tiptoe around saying certain things about my research and what I'm sensitive to. And the money was there as far as assistantship. So I would say that's what really brought me to the University of Illinois, and particularly this program.
So we can really just do an hour or two just on this question.
Yeah.
I had no plans in high school to attend college. So I got here because I was following a girlfriend. Don't tell my wife. It's the only school I applied to. And how I got to the College of Education, it's kind of a twofold thing. I think Professor Anderson and I had taken a class, and race and ethnicity, Ronald Takaki, that whole thing, where you scared the bejesus out of us, good Lord, with the papers and the research methods and all that stuff to prepare us, which I was not prepared. But I wanted to transfer in from liberal arts to the college. And professor says to me, and I think maybe you reviewed something, but basically, hey, you just don't got what it takes. And that was honest. And I had to get serious about things. Because a lot of us come here pretty angry, whether we realize it or not, because there's a lot we don't know, right? And we feel invisible. But that made me feel visible for whatever reason, so thank you. And I got serious. But then Professor Arlette Willis, back there, which, geez, pulled me in. And it happened kind of, I don't know if you remember this, but I was nominated for the Outstanding Student Medal. I was not a student within the college as an undergrad. So that didn't happen, but thank you. But there was an opportunity. You worked, I think Keisha, if I remember Keisha, said, hey, Mike, you got to come here and do this thing. Curriculum and instruction, I wanted to be a teacher, I wanted to give back. And because of Professor Willis, I got pulled in. There was a fellowship. It was painless. And the support was there, to your point. It was there. There are no guarantees. There are no guarantees. But I knew that, at least for the first time in my academic life, that I was being given an opportunity for the work that I was doing, and based on my potential, where I hadn't really thought about that in the past.
Right. Well, sorry for my voice, I'm a little sick, but I actually did not want to come to the University of Illinois. I actually wanted to go to Oklahoma. Why? I have no idea at the time. But I ended up coming because I was offered a full ride, so that was really beneficial to me and my family. I originally was an early childhood education major. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't even think I was even going to go to college. So education was kind of just the one thing that I always had going for me, so I wanted to be a teacher. Coming in, my first year, it was okay. It was not what I had expected. It was not something that I realized I could see myself doing in the future, for a bunch of different reasons, which I'm sure we'll get to talk about later. And then my sophomore year, that is when the program of Learning and Education Studies came out. And when I got here, I started realizing more about the issues of diversity and how they affected me, because before I was closed off and it just wasn't something that I thought about. When I came here, it was just prominent, and they became issues that I was very passionate about. So when this program came out, I was like, I need to do that. I want to study this, and yeah.
Like Georgie, I also did not want to go here. Not for the same reasons. My older sisters and my father and all of my older cousins went here, and I was like, I gotta be different. Didn't happen. I was actually really nervous to come here because I knew it was a predominantly white institution, and I spent most of my, I guess, educational years in predominantly black schools, just high school, elementary school. And so I was really nervous. I knew I wanted to go into education, but I was in denial about it, because I was like, well, like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't necessarily know if I want to be a teacher. I know that it's important to me, but I don't know if that's what I wanted to focus on. So I ended up switching into elementary ed my sophomore year after I took Educational Psychology 201 with Dr. Zola, shout out to him. But we ended up doing like this research paper on a topic in education that was really important to us. And I realized in that class how much I liked research. And I was like, whoa, like I could totally go into schools, figure out like what we need to do and how do we get there? What does that mean? What are kids doing? What can we do to support them? And so that was kind of how I found myself in this major.
Elementary teachers who think. Elementary teachers who think. This is a good thing. I'm going to start with you this time, and we'll go back down that direction just to keep the mic moving properly. So we've heard a little bit about some positive experiences that you've had, but are there other positive experiences that you've had, or the strength of your particular programs now that you're in them? Can you think of particular strengths that are represented there that you didn't know were there when you first started?
Sure. Okay, so all of my professors are white. All of them this year. I've had one professor that was black the whole time I've been at this university. And that says something to a person, especially when you're in education and you don't see anybody who mirrors you. And I would say, while this is a weakness, it's also a strength, because my professors have done such a great job of not making me the black girl, if that makes sense. Not that I'm opposed to talking about my experience or anything of that nature, but it's very, I don't know how to explain it, but you kind of feel like a deer in headlights whenever they want you to talk about like black issues, because I can't speak for every black person, and I can only talk about my experience, which is what it is. And so I'm really grateful to this program that I don't feel like every time slavery comes up, what does Tori have to say? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, I really appreciate that, and like their sensitivity towards me.
That's good.
So again, my focus in my major is educational equality and cultural understanding. So for me, I guess one positive thing was all my professors. I actually did have a diverse group of professors, Dr. Span, Dr. Pak, Dr. Anderson. So it was great. I learned a lot from them. And again, just having people of color minorities, teaching classrooms, being in that position, it motivated me. It's like, if they can do it, I can do it. If they're standing up there, I could stand up there one day. And another thing, a lot of my classes were very discussion based as well, which I believe is way better than a lecture hall, because in a lecture hall you don't get to raise your hand and have your input. You just sit there and you listen. In a discussion, you get to dialogue, you get to grow, you get to hear what other people have to say and understand their perspective, and they can understand yours. I think for me that was a big part of my growing process as a student, and learning what I want to do in the future. And yeah, just allow people to hear you out, hear your experiences, and learn from them, and take that and just apply the concepts that you learn in your everyday learning experience.
So it's been a while since I've been away, but I can say that listening, that was the most important thing, right? To be listened to and validated. You know, God knows I wasn't always right. But, you know, I remember back when we were going through the student teaching kind of, you know, experience, which if you're interested in urban education, unfortunately, this is probably not the place you want to go to. But I was in Decatur. And so, but someone in my cohort, if you think Donald Trump is an issue, this guy was something else. But I say that because there was safe space here to kind of go at that person, right? Not negatively, and but really to try to show that individual, you know, why he was wrong. I don't think he ever believed it. You know, looking back 15, 16 years, you know, after the fact, everyone always learns and will continue to learn. And I knew that, you know, through the kind of CNI, I think it was the last class of senior year, or whatever it was, that the packet of curriculum, and it was a monster, Professor Willis. You know, I didn't appreciate it, but it teaches you how to, you know, think about what you're going to say and what's the purpose behind that, and that applies not just in the classroom but in the boardroom. You know, I got to work with bankers and so on and so forth for about 9 or 10 years or more. I would often walk into boardrooms where I was the only person of color, and look, I'm pretty light-skinned, right? I'm white, who knows what I am? But the point is that they were needing to listen to me, and sometimes, you know, we would shut those banks down during the financial collapse. But I needed to help them learn and understand, and that was part of my job, and that's what this college prepared me to do.
Well, one benefit of going last is just to say, you know, I can echo everything that you all said. It truly resonated. And just to add to that, I would just say that I created my own path as far as like the clinical piece, and I was allowed to do it. So clinically, you know, we get to see people, college students on campus at the counseling center or career center, and other things like that for our program, in addition to the research piece. And I really wanted a diversity-enriched experience. I really wanted to work with ethnic minority clients. And I was like, because I know the stigma to mental health, I understand these things, and I kind of want to reach these people more and more. And I was allowed to, you know, speak up and say, this is what I want, and I was able to get those clients at the different places that I worked. And when it was time for our next round of practicum, our next experience with working with clients, I just felt like the opportunities that we had in the community, and even what we had on campus after I've already done some of them, I was like, I don't really feel like this fits for me anymore. Like, I want to continue to work with clients, Black clients, clients of color, and I kind of feel like I ran out of the opportunities. And so my program supported me in creating an opportunity. I was able to work with a private practice in the community that actually worked with students of color, even children of color, and underserved populations, and that was the things that I really wanted to do. And so that was really helpful, not only just being supported and listened to about my desires to reach these individuals, but also just saying, hey, Ariel, we'll allow you to do your own thing. And so, and that was also seen in my research, and also just thinking about it, not really feeling like, I don't know, you're stuck to one person. Dr. Neville is great with connecting me to other scholars who are like, hey, you know, I'm doing this research, we can add to that. So kind of feeling that collaborative piece and connecting with other people. And I'm so happy that I'm a part of the College of Education because I get to see a lot of people that look like me. And I think that that's a privilege to a certain degree because, and I know other folks in different programs, they cannot say that, or different colleges. They're like, well, I walk the building and I don't see any other face that looks like me. Whereas I'm like, oh, what's up, Theo? You know? And so that's always good to know. Yeah, I just gave you a shout out, Theo. And so always just actually being able to see a face and see someone like Dr. Neville and Dr. Anderson and say, man, I can do that. I can be that one day. And I think you all pretty much mentioned that. So yeah, those are some of the positive experiences that I did not expect to get.
So hang on to that mic. Are there things that you would have wished you could have received more of
Yeah.
during your time here at UIUC?
Yes. While my assistantships were really helpful, so I'm the graduate assistant for Sankofa Black Student Outreach at the Counseling Center. I do a lot of psychoeducational workshops for Black students, and I've been a TA on this campus for career theory and practice and exploring cultural diversity. And those experiences, yes, they funded my time here and waived my tuition and blessed me with a stipend. I'm so happy for. But it can be pretty taxing, right, to prepare for a class, grade, and do things. And I kind of felt like at some point in this program, I kind of wanted to sit back and really just focus on my research. I really just wanted to write. I just really wanted to focus on that. And I felt like fellowship opportunities were limited. And I kind of felt like if I was applying for a fellowship, my stuff is diversity focused, right? I'm talking about how to get Black women to perform better on math tasks. And I had to think about, okay, how can I make this sound more psychological, quote unquote? How can I make this sound so important when I'm applying for these fellowships? And I did not have any success in getting any, but it was just like, man, I really wish there were more opportunities for that so I can have that time. I'm sorry.
Time for research.
Yeah, time for research and opportunities for more fellowship so I can do that. And also I would have liked more opportunities for more practical statistical pieces. Wanting to be an academic and thinking about, man, how can stats apply? A lot of the classes, we have to take 4 stats classes in my program, and they've been helpful, but I think it would be even more helpful to have some of those workshops where students can come in and learn, hey, what does this mean for my research? And even though my research might sound different than your research, how do these stats apply? And so those were kind of, I guess, 2 things, and I guess it kind of points to my interest with research. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what else could have been done. I think that when you're a student of color, Black, brown, look, you are pulling the Titanic through sand, and you are exhausted. By the time I came to the end of graduate school, now I left early. I did not intend on completing that degree. I ended up in Washington, D.C., as a fellowship, and I was doing things. I got accepted into law school, and I thought I was done, but a friend of mine, Dr. Levon Henry, who, he throws Harvard badge at me all the time, said, you close every door you open, young man. Close every door you open. And so I think that's when I contacted you and said, what do I need to do? And so the college accountability, there was a program in Oak Brook I could finish, and I was working with Ford Motor Company at the time, and I was allowed to finish. Thinking back, my own trajectory probably would have been something policy-wise, or what can we do to change the discussion in Springfield and Washington, D.C.? Because it's so focused on the classroom, especially in undergrad, right? In graduate school, you get to do some things. But for most folks in my cohort, we were exhausted, and I don't know what else could have been done because we'd received so much support just to get through. It took many years for me to just exhale. But I couldn't think of anything particularly that we could change, or we would change.
So, my experience in my program has been a positive one. It is new. It is fairly new. I'm a senior now. It was implemented my sophomore year, so I was one of the first people to be transferred into the program. But when I first started off, a lot of the classes I were in were teaching based. While teaching obviously is so important to education, there's way more that goes into education aside from teaching. And for me, that was kind of a struggle because I was not going to go into teaching. So how was I going to apply those teaching specific concepts into my field of study? I also didn't even know what I was going to do with my bachelor's. There wasn't really, because again, the program was so new, there wasn't really an idea of what I wanted to do. And then I had my advisor, and Michelle Ellis, where are you at? Dr. Span, one of my fraternity sorority advisors, they mentioned student affairs. So that's how I kind of started thinking, okay, everything I'm learning here, I could apply to student affairs when I go get my master's in student affairs. But in terms of the program, I think there needs to be more discussions on education outside of the classroom, because most of my learning experiences of the ways I've grown on this campus were because of my learning experiences outside of the classroom. And I think that's very important to tell people. You don't necessarily have to be a teacher in order to go into education. There's other ways you can be a part of education.
I guess I'll just be really honest. I think something that I would have appreciated more is support. And just to completely throw it all out there, like in the beginning of the semester, this was the first semester, because the way U of I does elementary ed is we're split into cohorts, and we are with those girls until we graduate at that point. And I really liked it last year because we got to pick our classes, we were with our friends, it was cool. So we got split up into our cohorts, and I realized there's only one other girl in my class who was black. And in the beginning, we realized most of our classes are social justice focused, and I did not feel like many of the girls in my cohort wanted to talk about those things in a way that was meaningful. And so for me, whenever I would speak up in class, I just really, really needed support from my professors, from my classmates, and I didn't feel like I was getting it. And like Michelle Ellis can like attest to the fact that like I was ready to go. I was like, get me in a different major. I don't know, whatever will get me out of here in 4 years. I can't do this. And I think it took me taking my own issues and just being my own advocate and letting my professors know, like, I don't feel comfortable in class when we talk about these things because of this or because of that. And I've seen change, and not only that, but I've made more friends, I guess, with the other people of color who aren't necessarily black in my cohort, and I really, really appreciate them. But I definitely think support was a major one, because I think I give off this idea, like if you've heard me talk in class, that like I just have it all together, I'm just so good. But it's just like I would leave class and cry. So it was like support was huge for me.
Sure.
My train of thought kept flowing. One thing I would say along with the support is while there are a lot of people of color that are professors or in administrative positions, I don't see a lot of Latinx people in the College of Education, which for me is very hard. I do identify as a Latina woman. I'm Mexican and Guatemalan. For me, that's very important. I found a lot of my support through the Cultural House here, but I didn't find a lot of Latinx support here within the College of Education. I would love to see more Latinx professors in the College of Education in these programs. I think that's very important, because oftentimes conversations about Latinx experiences, specifically in education, get left out. We do talk a lot about African American experience, Asian American experiences, but I hardly ever hear any talk or discussions of Latinx experiences in education, which there is a lot of research about because I've done it. So there's no reason why we should not include it. So it's something I would definitely love to see within every program. Oh.
So this is the last round of questions. So now you are the people who have to recruit students to come to the UIUC. What would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
I would tell them to be resilient. Like, you're never, first off, as a minority in America, you're never going to be, I mean, unless you go to an HBCU, but you're never going to be a majority, unfortunately, and you have to learn how to work within those confines. And additionally, like, don't think that every person that doesn't look like you is your enemy, because there are a ton of people who want to support you, and they want to help you get to where you need to go, and they believe that you have a potential, and that you have strength, and that you can grow. And then I would also say find friends. I think my friends they're my cheerleaders. I have so many of them in this room right now. And I love them so much. And so I would say just find people that, again, support you, because you have you have to support yourself, but it's like, it shows in a lot of statistics that like students of color do have to do things 10 times harder than other students just to get the same recognition. And so get somebody that you can talk to, that you can be yourself with. I lucked out with an amazing advisor. Michelle Ellis is awesome, and I like that I can talk to her. And that was what I needed. So just know what you need and come in here with the expectation of what you deserve, but then also don't cut people out. Like, everybody here, especially at this university, I feel like personally, they want you to succeed. I haven't met anybody who I felt like didn't want me to do that, so.
And that's powerful. That in and of itself is powerful.
If I'm being very transparent, I think the advice I would give is it's going to be white. It's going to be very white for people of color here, and it's going to be intimidating, and you're going to want to crawl in your little shell. I've done it. But it's going to be okay, because the support is there. The support is there if you look for it and if you want it. I managed to find my support in the College of Education, and it has influenced my experience so much. And I think that's very important to remind students. There's no reason why they can't succeed, because, again, everyone here, all the professors, they want you to succeed. They will give you the tools to succeed. You just have to want it. And I think that's very important.
I have to think about this. And my goddaughter graduated about a year ago from here, not the college, but from the university. And I forgot how I sold her on it. And now I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son, figure that out. And I'm hoping she comes here, which is, but how am I selling it? I think, it's diversity matters. I think I like be resilient. That's probably the best advice. But what does that mean? I think I would wear a good shirt and allow yourself to be pulled, because you don't know it all. And the challenge that many of us have is that we don't have anyone to learn from, right? We didn't grow up with someone with this experience. So it's like landing on the moon, and there's not an instruction manual. So you don't know about money, you don't know about funding, you don't know about how to structure your class schedule, you don't know about who you go to when you have a problem. You're just doing it on the fly, and it is exhausting for students of color. It's exhausting. And it wears them out. And God forbid if your native language is not English, because the likelihood that you drop out is exceptionally high, right? Because there's some latency. You haven't built in all those skills. You kind of faked it till you made it, but then you couldn't make it anymore. So be resilient, seek help. But then what I would say is faculty members, reach out and pull those students in. They need you. Because I don't think, but for your advice, right? You got to take it serious, Professor Anderson. You're not ready yet. Being open enough, being true to myself, and having someone who's supportive as Professor Willis, and to pull me into the graduate school. You need that kind of help from faculty members. We need you, we still need you. My position now at UIC, I get to sit on search committees, and that is a trip, because what you will see is you know, we do it. We institutionalize everything in this world. But, you know, if you don't have a certain degree from a certain school, so if you get, you know, you go to a small school, good luck getting a job at a school like this. Because for some reason, that experience is devalued. And I think that's ridiculous. And that's one of the things I hope to change. And we'll talk about that one day. But that's it. Be resilient and wear a good shirt and allow yourself to be pulled.
That's great. I would just say, you know, I agree, definitely. And adding to that, I don't know, I would just say you're not a diversity quota. They need you. Like, they need you. And I think a lot of times, the students of color, we come to universities, particularly like predominantly white institutions, PWIs, and it's like, oh, well, you know, I need this university, and I need this, and I need that. Don't get me wrong. Of course, we're coming to college to learn, but you come in with your own experiences. You come in with your own prior knowledge, and you have something to offer. And I think that when we get those messages from our advisors, when we get it from our teachers, we feel special. And that's when our creative juices start flowing, right? And that's when we're able to give our best. And I think that I would just remind students of that, because a lot of times there's the imposter phenomenon, right? I don't deserve to be here. And it's like, no, you do. You do. And so I would tell them that. And also, you don't have to do it alone. Right. A lot of times, and I think Dr. Neville and I have these conversations about the differences between like how students, black students might work on things, because statistically, just thinking about when I first came in the program, from my stats program, classes, I was trying to do it by myself, y'all, and I was struggling. I was spending hours and hours trying to read things, and Dr. Neville was like, how about you talk with your colleagues, right? Like, I think it might be best for you all to work together in a group. And I saw success with other students, and they've done that. And so I gave that a try, and it was amazing. I was able to add to the group. They were able to add to me. And so I would just remind students of color particularly, you know, find your own thing, find your own support, like you all were saying, academically, socially, and even the social piece. The persons or the people that you might not that you might connect with might not be just students. I've made friends in the community as well. So thinking about those circles, but yeah, you don't have to do it alone, and you are important. That's what I would say.
Before I say anything more, I think this panel deserves a round of applause for the wisdom they shared. Thank you. And I have to say that most of the time when I visit schools, the kind of positive things that students have to say about the institution are not nearly this forceful. And so kudos to UIUC for whatever you're doing. Not that we can't grow or get better, but for whatever you're doing, particularly in terms of the faculty whose names were called out here, and the students whose support was suggested here as important. There's something good going on here. So kudos to the institution, which I rarely say. No, truly, I rarely say kudos to most institutions. But yeah, something good is going on at UIUC. Now, I'm not sure if this is the way it's supposed to happen, like I'm supposed to just keep going. Is that what's supposed to happen? Ooh, let's ask questions. I like that too. You know, I'm not usually in charge like this. This is kind of exciting. Are there questions for the panel, particularly, that might be important? Things you want to ask students? You don't get to do this too often now, so you might want to ask them something. They're actually quite wise. Quite wise. Any thoughts? Anything they raised up for you? Yes.
So I think I was thinking a lot about LaToya, your remarks being a member of the elementary cohort. I'm an instructor for the cohort as well. And so I've heard some of the same concerns about feeling isolated from school. how can we major instructors of color support you all in this process as well?
I have not experienced any instructors of color yet in my actual cohort. I had my Dr. Span was my first and only, but I will say that my friends and I are not in MAFE or anything like that, which is the Minority Association for Educators. Mostly because we're busy, and a lot of us are working in addition to going to school. I did not get a full ride like George. Like I have to work. But I will say that we connected, I think, in a way that was. So I've had this conversation with Sunny about how like they obviously could not put all the minorities in one cohort. That would look really bad. But because of the fact that we all knew who each other were, we kind of made those connections for each other, and we were there to support each other. Particularly for myself, I have two friends in mind that whenever anything is said, I know I can look to them and they're like, yeah, we got you. Like, it's cool. Like, we agree what you said. But I also think it's hard. Like, it's hard because a lot of our experiences aren't reflected in the conversation that we're having in class. We'll bring up race and it'll be thrown away, or it'll be like, oh, okay, next, you know, and so it does make it hard and silencing for a lot of us. And so we have most of our conversations outside of class. And I don't know how to make it inside of class because we don't feel comfortable. And I'm speaking for me and my friends only. But I know, like, in our personal conversations, we don't feel comfortable having those conversations. And even when I try to push it, I feel like it's pushed back at such a rate, not even by my professors, but by my peers, that I'm just like, I don't even want this conversation to happen anymore. Like, it's okay. You don't believe that you know, like, we've had conversations about, like, protests. Like, I'll give an example, the March for Our Lives, and I said in class that I felt like I was a little conflicted about supporting it because I felt like people of color have been marching for our lives for forever. But now when we have these white students who, and I am not saying that what happened at Parkland was it was a horrible thing, but we have these white students who are getting Time magazine offers and scholarships and like media attention, and whenever we have marches we get tear gas and we get arrested and we get like all these other things, and somebody said, well, that's not our fault. And I was like, okay, I don't even want to talk about it no more. You know, like, it's fine, it's whatever. It's like that's silencing. And so for us, we will go to the library after class, or we'll go get food. And we'll be like, yo, she said this, and I believe this, and we just validate each other, and we just remind each other that we're here for a bigger purpose, which is, at least in our cohort, making a difference in other people's children's lives and being there for every student. And I think that that's something we just have come to do as a result of not feeling like we can speak in class.
Kind of going off of that, because I have had experience in early childhood education, and my major allows me to have these conversations all the time, which I love. But being in an early childhood or elementary ed or middle school ed, these are conversations you don't get to have because it's a predominantly white program. But these are conversations that you should be having, that this program should be having, because you are gonna, as a teacher, you don't know where you're gonna end up. You're gonna be having students that are people of color, that are minorities, and how are you going to help them grow as people, as students, if even now at the college level you're not validating their feelings, you don't even want to have these conversations, you're setting them aside. And I think that's something that should definitely be implemented in the classes for education, teaching programs, because you're going to be working with these students. You need to be able to support them. If not, you're not doing your job.
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry. I just want to add this too. For professors, for TAs, for all of that, I think another important thing is going there with your minority students. Because if you drop it and then they drop it, then we feel like it wasn't important. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like a lot of, even with the professors, I love my professors, but I do feel like there have been moments where I've said things, and I guess maybe they didn't know how to respond to it either. Exactly. And so it was just like, okay, let's move on. And then you sit there, you're like, well, this is why the girls don't take me seriously, you know? And so just that type of thing, like maybe, I don't know, preparing for those types of conversations, because I do feel like, which is why I said support was a huge thing, because I do feel like we get into those situations where we want to talk, but we feel like it falls on deaf
Yeah,
ears.
this question of what is education for the teacher, right? So most of us came through teacher ed programs at a time when these conversations were not central to our education. And then we're supposed to be the people who lead them. But most of us do not have the skills to do so. And students are asking us to do something very different today that we are not trained and prepared to do. So a lot of this is going to end up falling on us, but just my little commentary on the side. Other questions? Comments, thoughts? Thank you for the question. Yeah, go ahead.
To follow up a little bit with the issue of, peers or same race or heritage, I listened to your, I forgot your name, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Ariel.
What's your, Ariel?
Yeah, it's no problem.
When you were talking about how important it was for you that your advisor was your same race, like him, so how do you approach that when not everybody can get their advisor to be, it's just, I know it's what we're trying to do, like, reality. My advisor, for example, I'm a doctoral student, and my advisor is not Latina. Does it affect me in my research? No. So that's my personal thing. But I understand, like, for your research, it was very important. But what do you say when you cannot accommodate that?
Yeah. No, that's
for
a
everybody?
great question. And I think too that goes down to personal preference too. I'm happy you made that comment. That was important for me because I'm like, I need to see this modeled through. I'm a first generation college student. I have to see this. But I would say just listening to sensitivity is important. I've had, particularly in undergrad, I had the director of the McNair program. He was a white male who helped me a lot with research and to get to this university. But he was sensitive to diversity. I didn't feel like he was like, well, Ariel, tell me about the black experience, like Tori was saying, right? And I'm like, say what? Like, I thought we were supposed to talk about X, Y, and Z, right? So really listening to what the person is saying, I would say, like, are they sensitive to my perspective? Do they actually welcome my research? Is it more so of like, I got a black student or a Latinx student or a color that I could just check this off my list, right? Or is it coming from, they have a great experience, they can add to my research, what can I do to support them? And I feel like we can pick that up through microaggressions, right? We can pick that up through how these individuals can prioritize us or not prioritize us. And so I think just knowing your values and what you want from an advisor is really important. And if race is an important factor, then I would say seek that, but if not, that's cool too. But I think that being a person of color, that sensitivity is important for our mental health, because over time we can't take so many microaggressions after a long period of time. We just can't. And so they have many white competent advisors that can actually help students of color. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, and let me just add, I never thought, and what I'm hearing here is, it was never having a Latino, or these days Latinx, which I'm still getting used to, a Latino in front of me, or Latina, that wasn't important, as much as, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you there for me? And because the most influential advisors I had were black, right? It started with Chester Fontenot in African American literature, right? Because I could draw parallels between the Puerto Rican experience and the African American experience, right? That worked for me. And then coming here, and Professor Anderson, obviously, Professor Willis. And I had a Latino in graduate school who I was doing a fellowship or graduate assistant with, and he's good, but that wasn't what motivated me. So you need to find what works, to your point. Race is important. But are you listening to me? And that's what I'm hearing. Are they willing to engage in that dialogue with you, right? And so that's all we want. That's all anyone ever wants. But that's my 2 cents.
Can I add something to that too? I think even thinking about being colorblind, I think that I would just, I think that's a red flag for me, when working with someone that doesn't look like me. It's like, I don't see you as black. Well, you just mentioned it, right? And so thinking about that and the research about colorblindness, how it does not help race relations, right? No, Dr. Neville can talk about that. And so just thinking about what does that mean for you? I think that when these individuals aren't colorblind, right, they are able to pull the resources that will help you. Right? They're able to say, well, I know that you were interested in this job. Well, in diversity, there's a job opening for that. And they're able to help you in that and kind of tailor your experience to your desires. So I think that that's important. And that's a red flag to me when a person doesn't look like me. Yeah.
Kind of just going off of that, this idea of sensitivity. Again, a lot of professors, not to say that you guys are old, but you guys went through your but you guys earned your degrees at a time where these conversations were not, it wasn't like you guys weren't having these conversations. It wasn't very like, oh yeah, I'm gonna talk about race and it's gonna be okay. Like, no, I mean, not that it's still okay anyways, but I mean, nobody likes to have these conversations, but people are more open to it. So kind of going through those trainings. If you have time to get a diversity training, time to have these conversations, have them so that you could cater to the needs of your students. I'm gonna start my master's program in the fall. I'm gonna be one of 2 Latinas in the cohort. And at first I didn't want to go, but I decided to go there intentionally because I said I need to be in that space. I want to be one of the first Latinas in that program. And a lot of the students told me, well, and my advisor is going to be white. I know she's going to be white. I've met her. But a lot of the African-American students that were in the program, they're like, it's fine. You're going to be okay because these professors and these advisors have the training necessary. It is a social justice based program as well. So they're able to cater to my needs. I think that's very important to be able to have these conversations and have these diversity certificates, diversity trainings. And I think that's definitely something that advisors and professors should have in order to be sensitive to people of color in the classroom or as just students in general that come to look to you for help.
All right, so another quick, fabulous, amazing round of applause for these students. Makes me want to come to UIUC. Don't tempt me. I'm going to, I can't quite tell what time and energy I have, but I'm going to try to sort of echo some of what the students have already told us today, but also make some of their points maybe even a bit more strongly. They're kind, incredibly generous, but I think there's some things that power doesn't allow them to say that I want to be able to say. So I'm going to start there. But I appreciate so much all of what you all have said. And I'm going to stick pretty close to this little thing. I'm not going to do a lot of walking and whatever, because I did write comments just to try to keep myself on task. But I've spent a good deal of my academic life thinking about these kinds of topics. The work of spirituality, the work of remembering in an academic life, power, and why remembering is so important, particularly in the life of African Americans, but I think in the life of many people of color. I won't talk a lot about specific strategies for recruitment and retention, but again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk about the things that are underneath recruitment and retention that we've got to get right if we're going to, in fact, have contexts where students are going to feel like they can show up as all of themselves versus showing up only partially.
I'm particularly sensitive to, Tori, your comments, partly because I come out of a teacher ed background, right? Elementary very particularly. This conversation about who's in the room is one that we have got to address. And that normalization of white women, female, middle class, usually from rural communities in the same state where you are, is a problem, and we've got to address that. So I'll get to that later. But I want to talk today about covenants. Now, some of you church-going folk understand the notion of covenants. I tend not to be a church-going folk, but I understand the notion of covenants. Covenants is something holy, something that guides usually a particular religion or a particular doctrine. And the covenants here around teacher diversity, recruitment, retention, I think ask that we start our conversations by making explicit the informal, solemn, and binding agreements that we've made in relation to who teachers are, who they should be, and where we are in our profession. For me, it's the desire to unpack a painful paradox that is embodied very specifically in an often unknown essay by James Baldwin entitled A Talk to Teachers. And if you've never read it, you need to go find it. It's in PDF. It's all over the place. You can find it. And we heard that same echo in the voices of the panelists today. Baldwin states this. He said, I decided very early on that there had been a mistake made somewhere. I was not a nigger even though you called me one. But if I was a nigger in your eyes, there was something about you. There was something you needed. I had to realize when I was very young that I was none of those things I was told I was. I was not, for example, happy. I never touched a watermelon for all kinds of reasons that had been invented by white people, and I knew enough about life by this time to understand that whatever you invent, whatever you project, is you. So where we are now is that a whole country of people believe I'm a nigger, and I don't, and the battle's on. Because if I'm not what I've been told I am, then it means that you're not what you thought you were either. And that is the crisis. We need some new covenants, some new agreements in our teacher education programs in particular, but I think in institutions more broadly, and in our own minds and hearts as part of these communities, in order to unpack what Baldwin was talking about. And his words, while specific to the condition of blacks in our nation, are echoed in the continued bad faith within which institutions enter into covenant with our Native, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx brothers and sisters as well. Now, Webster suggests that a covenant has two parts. First, I always give everything all together. You know, people make that thing go in and out. I like take it all at one time, digest it all. So first, it's a covenant is a written agreement or a promise, usually under seal between two or more parties, especially for the performance of some action. But secondly, the second part of a covenant is that it's a common law action to recover damages for breach of such a contract. So a starting place that is also foundational for our conversation on teacher diversity or recruitment and retention might begin with a different question than one commonly asked about how to increase the sheer numbers of teachers of color or students of color or faculty of color. That is, what are the agreements that we have made, or the promises we've made, that operate fundamentally with racism and other injustices at the center? We've got to wrestle with that question. For example, what covenants have been made to uphold the chasms between the number of white teachers and the shrinking number of teachers of color in our schools and in our schools of education? Just as an example. To normalize the discourses of whiteness such that we honestly believe and act in line with that belief that there are no teachers of color, and that by default our colleges and schools of education are primarily white, middle class, female, and from communities with little ethnic or racial diversity, and then we treat that as okay. Can we unpack the covenants between the institutions where we work and teachers representing various social identities and racial and cultural and ethnic identities? Those between who we say we are and who we say we want. To the last question, what are the promises that we've also made to inadvertently, unconsciously, or blatantly exclude those racially and ethically diverse persons? And most importantly, are we willing to acknowledge our own lies, our own collusions and exclusions in those covenants? What we heard today, I think, at some level, at its core, was about a certain kind of truth-telling, which I appreciated from you all. And such truth-telling of the unknown stories, of the histories, inequitable practices, deliberate work of racism, sexism, homophobia, blah, 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 that reside within us will require sitting in often unflattering and difficult light with a certain kind of humility, compassion, and honesty. While there are many covenants that we've made in schools and colleges of education in our profession as educators, I want to raise 3 today that will forever hinder our efforts to make more diverse and equitable conditions in teacher education if we don't interrogate and get rid of them. Again, keep in mind that a covenant is an agreement that we've made or a promise that we've made between parties about some action to be taken. So I hope I don't upset too many people here, but covenant 1. We have agreed, we have done this. We have agreed to both tacitly and explicitly that whiteness must remain at the center of how we and why we engage in education. We tacitly have done that. Secondly, we have a covenant that says in this space of whiteness, we have agreed that opening spaces for those who are not white or who are not straight or rich or male or don't speak English as a first language is about helping or saving us. That is, those people, right? It is about assuaging the guilt of generations for mistreatment and inequities. As our engagements are not about a moral reckoning, we're not ready to do that, to have a moral reckoning. We have thus agreed that the structures of exclusion will remain firmly in place. So unless we have a moral conversation about this, it's not going to really matter how many programs we have or how many recruitment strategies we use. We've got to somehow wrestle with this covenant that we've made that whiteness is at the center of what we do. And then the third covenant that we've made is that whatever the term diversity means, we have substituted that term for equity and justice. And bodies of color are the point or the place at which diversity gets taken up. If you haven't read any work by Sarah Ahmed, you need to just get on the Amazon right now and order her book. These are the covenants that we're living within. These are the agreements that we've made. But I think an important part of this conversation has to also be about the second part of the definition of covenant that I raised earlier, about Baldwin's characterization of the crisis that we continue to exist within. Said as a question, what are those common law actions that we must take to recover damages for the breach of covenants we've made? I speak specifically about teacher education, but I think these are broader covenants that we've made across these institutions, that we've made throughout our institutions, that have created the crisis in education that necessitated a conference or a day like the one we're attending today. To examine these questions, I'm suggesting here that we all, every one of us, have to do the work of remembering in order to stand fully in our personhood. We must also remember to seek something embodied in the title of an exhibit I saw in Philly last summer, and that I will speak of later, a little bit later as well. That is, we must seek for ourselves and our students an audacious freedom. I love that word, audacious. We must remember the work of remembering and honoring our diversity, that work is not only about the colored folks. Blacks and other people of color are not commodities to be bought and sold and codified on our brochures, in our reports, and centered in progressive white liberal agendas. As I recently shared with a white colleague of mine who was doing an interview qualitative research, and she wanted very pointedly to know my definition of diversity. What I could tell her was that whatever that thing was, that diversity thing was, it had to get off of my body. And it had to get onto both of our bodies, with the goal that that thing, diversity, eventually rest comfortably in the space between us. If she wasn't ready to have that conversation, I was sort of like Auntie Maxine at that point. I was reclaiming my time. So in the same visit to the African American Museum in Philly, and again, if you haven't been to that museum in Philadelphia and you're ever there, you really need to go. It's an amazing space. I witnessed a short film by Julie Dash. Some of you know her work, Daughters of the Dust. This was a small short film that she did called Standing at the Scratch Line. She spoke, as I have in previous work, about how arrivals and departures, you heard a little bit about arrivals and departures here, are very powerful places of memory. She says this: Our deepest memories live at the places of our arrival and departures. They are at the edge of salt waters, like the eternal turn of the ocean waves. We need to honor life stories that reside where salt water meets the shore, where these students' lives come to this place. Returning to sacred spaces of departure and arrival, this film, that is Standing at the Scratch Line, is a cinematic ode to the spirituality that migrants carry with them when they create new homes. Every one of us have made covenants with ourselves, our families, our institutions, our society, about the meanings of our arrivals and departures. Some are conscious, others are not, but all rest at the feet of uncovering how we might get to some understanding of who we are for real. But what I know, even as I'm often rendered invisible as a black woman, I know that your identity is wrapped up in mine, and that my being is wrapped up in yours. And new covenants between us must be based on unpacking what that means. Frankly, that's about most people coming to know who I am as a black woman when I am most me. It's about coming to know who we are, how we are together, and how we must recover and redress in ways that honor us equitably as free minds and free people in the work of education. Now, the panelists today shared some truths, some rememberings of their life here and experience here at UIUC, some experiences with schooling more generally, some experiences that have some bearing on teacher education. These stories speak to what happens when people of color, people of generous spirits that honor our collective cultures and covenants arrive and depart from the shores of educational experiences typified by formal schooling contexts in the U.S. But I ask that we consider two things. One, the way these stories embody those very problematic and unhealthy covenants that I spoke of earlier, and two, the ways that these stories map on, or maybe don't, to your own educational experiences and help you to understand the covenants that you've made. What I'm also asking is that you consider and try to conjure, that's what we do, what new agreements or what new covenants are necessary in this context of UIUC to address teacher diversity matters. And those matters are not simply about the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. They are about creating contexts that honor the ability and spirit of those diverse teachers to stand fully in who they are and to stand in that space with the audacious freedom that equitable conditions require. Okay? So the second part of this talk is about church, which is really interesting to me. That time I went to Philly last summer was really impactful for me. I had not been to Philadelphia before, and spending time in a city like that, where black people's history is just everywhere, was really impactful for me. So I want to talk a little bit about Mother Bethel. Some of you might know a little bit about Mother Bethel. I want to talk about the African Supplement, which many of you might not know about, and who is teaching who for what purpose. I'm going to start with a quote from a book that, get on the Amazon. The book is a young adult literature piece called The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. If you have not read that book, you must read that book. It's a piece of young adult literature, but Angie Thomas is brilliant. We had her at UGA just a few weeks ago. She came to talk about the book. Our department had picked up the book, read the book, and then had discussions as an entire department of educational theory and practice. It was one of those kinds of books that can get folks talking about all kinds of things. And so I'm encouraging, Dean, if you have a little extra money, that we actually had the staff, faculty, and graduate students in our department read that book as a requirement. We bought it for them. And then we brought her to campus to talk about the work. It was probably one of the most powerful professional developments, those things that faculty need to do to get ready, that we've ever had at Georgia. But Angie Thomas, the protagonist in this book's name is Star. And she's an African-American girl, young girl, high school age girl. And I want to start with this quote for this section of the talk. She said, "That's the problem. We let people say stuff, and they say it so much that it becomes okay to them and normal for us. What's the point of having a voice if you're going to be silent in those moments where you shouldn't be?" So before I went to Philly, I bought that book, Angie Thomas's book, The Hate You Give. I was intrigued by the title and the reviews that it was receiving. Of course, it's been on the New York Times bestsellers list for a long time. Coupled with a number of frightening encounters with law enforcement in my new home state of Georgia, this book changed my life. It helped me to understand more deeply the current wave of state-sanctioned violence against black and brown folks, and why movements like Black Lives Matter have arisen and are critical to resist such violence. And this incredible book speaks so clearly to this moment, a moment right here, right now, that might be characterized as between two covenants, the old and the new. It's also fundamentally a moment where the spirit and humanity of those historically characterized and relegated to the margins is choosing to talk back, to speak up, to act out, to demand, to be. Unfortunately, reports of violence as a result of these demonstrations of humanity often go a little something like this. These are just simply benevolent and innocent law enforcement officers only attempting to be useful, helpful, to do their job in economically poor communities of color in line with their stated covenant to protect and serve the public. But as Starr, the young African-American protagonist in The Hate You Give, says, funny, slave masters thought they were making a difference in black people's lives too, saving them from their wild African ways. Same shit, different century. I wish people like them would stop thinking that people like me need saving. So one of the things I was pleased in hearing in the students' voices today is that I didn't hear that narrative as strongly as I typically hear at universities, that y'all are trying to save folks of color, but instead trying to figure out to support and possibly doing more of that. So in Philly, I had the chance to take a guided tour of Mother Bethel Church. Again, if you ever get there, you should walk through that place. The first and oldest African-American denomination in the U.S. But to emancipate and wrestle this black church from St. George's, the white Methodist congregation, was not an easy task. I'm so proud of myself. I did this little history work for Dr. Anderson. But I think it's relevant to this particular, I was really happy about this. So, from 1794 to 1816, we're going to get a little history lesson. The relationship between Bethel Church and St. George's was a mixed bag. At times it was amicable and everybody got along just fine. At other times, mostly when blacks attempted to engage as free people, it was so tense that the St. George's leadership literally took all of the books and keys of the church, insisting that the congregation and all property really belonged to them. At still other times, things were so bad that the members of Mother Bethel had to sit in the aisles of their own church to prevent the pastors of St. George's from taking the pulpit to preach, and then charging them sums for that service in hopes of bankrupting the church. This led Richard Allen and the officers of Mother Bethel to use the law to amend the Articles of Incorporation to include what is famously referred to as the African Supplement in 1807. This supplement, a new kind of covenant with St. George's Methodists, gave trustees, and I'm quoting here, the right to nominate and appoint one or more persons of the African race to exhort and preach in Bethel Church and any other church which may hereafter become the property of the corporation. Leading to a final showdown in the Pennsylvania courts in 1815, St. George's successfully managed to auction off Bethel, and Allen was required to buy his own church back for $10,125. Eventually, a series of rulings in lower courts led to an 1816 hearing before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where Richard Allen and the members of Bethel were declared free from Methodist central control, and eventually went on with 15 representatives from other black Methodist congregations to convene the first General Conference at the newly freed Bethel Church in Philadelphia, and to establish and organize the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Now, in the tradition of Mother Bethel AME, those in the aisles, sitting in the aisles, were mostly young people. Most of us couldn't get down there. These are echoes of the same young people who are in the street in Parkland, in Charlottesville, in Seattle, in Ferguson. Our well-being and audacious freedom is a mutual one between young and old, so we need new covenants with young people in our nation and in our colleges. Promises that would invite a whole different way of being together in our quest for equity. Going back to Angie Thomas's book, there are lots of conversations between Maverick. You know, this is coming out as a film, right? And I think Common is playing Maverick. That's enough to make you want to watch it. So he is a Maverick kind of guy, but the dad's name is Maverick, and there's a lot of conversations between she and her dad. One such conversation sums up the seriousness of new covenants that we have to make to address inequities in our schools, in our profession, and eventually get to this business of recruiting a more diverse faculty and student body. This is Starr's voice. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing the tattoo of my baby picture on his upper arm. Now Maverick says, what does it say at the bottom? And Starr says, something to live for, something to die for. I say, without really looking, I've seen that tattoo my whole life. He says, exactly. You and your brothers are something to live for and something to die for, and I'll do whatever I gotta do to protect you. He kisses my forehead. If you're ready to talk, baby, talk. I got your back. So real talk of teacher diversity matters must be real talk about our agreements with youth and their futures, real talk about equity. The stories that the young people shared earlier are instructive in thinking about not the detailed specifics about how to do this recruitment or this retention. Frankly, many of the ways in which we typically come to it, outdated training models and stuff, don't provide a lot of guidance. It seems to me we must begin to talk about why and how we're mutually bound up, not only in our memories and remembering, but also in making our next steps meaningful and worthwhile for all, and very particularly for those who have been most harmed by the covenants we lived within. So teacher diversity matters, but equity, it feels like to me, is the way forward. With equity foregrounded in this way, there is at least the possibility of addressing historical and contemporary inequities of opportunity by studying them, by understanding them from multiple perspectives, and this is a wonderful way to start this morning. I believe we can be powerfully poised to engage in these complex challenges, but we need a smarter framework at this historical moment to address these grand challenges of equity and diversity in a more holistic manner. So this week was the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. I happened to have been in Indianapolis on that day. And I just have to tell you, I happened to have run into John Lewis. And it was like the most important moment of my life. We had a wonderful conversation in the Indianapolis airport. I forgot to take a selfie. I was so awestruck. But it was an amazing moment for me to stand and have a chance to have that interaction with him. But we talked a bit about Dr. King, but that's where I want to sort of turn. Because I think while I could have all kinds of critiques about Dr. King's work and words in many ways, there's something about his notions of beloved community that helped me think about what a curriculum might look like, what a set of strategies might need to be grounded in order for them to matter, in order for us to attend to both recruitment but also retention, in order for us to sort of strategize and change structures that these young folks were talking about. So let me talk about, just sort of briefly, sort of put these out there as a way to think about a foundation for a place. I think UIUC, from what I can hear from these young people, has some of this stuff in place already, but I think there's also other ways in which it might be strengthened. So when we think about our schools, we think about our schools of education. In order to think about teacher diversity matters, that's what I mean by recruitment and retention and sort of being in diversity, not just recruiting a few people to make it look cute on the cover of a magazine. The new covenants that I think we've got to create with relationship to curricula, with pedagogy, with policy, must instead rest on some different kinds of things. So one, it seems to me it's got to rest on this strong awareness that we have addresses, some of us, but we are citizens of a world, and that world is impacting us more importantly every day, and we've got to somehow figure out how to live with that. We have to somehow think about the curriculum and the pedagogies and the practices, relationships that we're engaged in, as standing on this notion of freedom, as an internal desire in the soul of every person, and in something important to preserving our humanity. Thirdly, that somehow this work is based in nonviolence and acceptance. And what I think Dr. King, where I think this might have needed a little tweaking, was that notion of acceptance isn't about sort of laying down and letting things be, but about this idea that there's a need to recognize the humanity of every person who comes into a space and to accept the fact that they are human without your endorsement. Okay? Fourthly, that an understanding that whatever affects one affects all indirectly. Fifthly, a recognition that we are each unique, that it's important that we are each unique. And it's something that the young people said earlier, and I didn't know if you all caught it as well. They were not suggesting that one needed to have these race-matched mentors, and there's been some work done around that. What they're suggesting is the fact that they have choices and options of who to choose as mentors based on projects, whether personal or otherwise, is important. That's important, right? An understanding that, Dr. King's famous lines about that we shouldn't be judged by the color of our skin, but the content of our character, that while all people have been psychologically damaged by the construct of race, somehow we've got to figure out within the context of our spaces, how do we help Black folks in particular, but brown folks and Asian folks and other folks understand that they don't have to be ashamed of being Black. And many of the students who are here we carry that until we are asked to show up as who we are. And so that would be an important piece as well. And then an emphasis on dignifying all labor, that the fact that we live in this country that has opportunity, but yet and still many of us are without the economic means to be able to access that, and we heard that on the panel too. So in the wake of these events brought on by white supremacist terror and violence in all the places I mentioned earlier, Parkland, Oakland, Charlottesville, I was reading, I told you I was just getting into Twitter. So I was on Twitter and trying to do something. I'm not good at it yet. I'm working on it though. But I was on Twitter, and Django Paris, some of you might know Django's work on cultural sustaining pedagogies. He was on Twitter and had tweeted about a series of tweets as he was preparing his syllabi for fall semester. And they seemed important in that they operationalized some of what Dr. King laid out in those beloved community tenets. This is the closest I'm going to get to actual strategies unless we get those pointed questions or have time to talk about them afterwards. But Django raised these questions, and again, just thinking about how do we operationalize those covenants that we've made, the new covenants that we might make with students and faculty and staff and curriculum. And he raised these questions, and they seemed like important touchstone questions. So if we're not ready to quite get here, again, it's not going to matter what recruitment strategies we use. So when we look at our syllabi, are they actively, not just passively, actively interrupting white supremacy, cis hetero ableist patriarchy? As educators, we have to design for that kind of space. Is the syllabus critically centering ongoing Native, Black, Latinx, API resistance? And then whose land are we standing on? Whose labor made this possible? And are we able to have those conversations as well? Are we able to have conversations about whether you can see the very people who are in your rooms, in your classrooms? Can you be troubled and excited by the possibilities that were implicit in these folks' voices today? What songs are you missing if you don't hear what they have to say? What love are you missing if you can't see it the way in which and feel it the way in which they put it out there? Can we be inspired by or called to action by what the folks at Mother Bethel did? They said they're going to build themselves a new church that honored the people who can teach, and in their case preach, in a way that recognizes the strength, courage, and wisdom of a people amidst their incredible oppressions, in spite of that. and nourish that goodness as the ground that might alleviate continued suffering. And finally, I'm going back to STAR. Are we ready to embrace a sense of a beloved community? That is, create the space at UIUC that has folks coming and feeling some of what you heard today, this sort of sense of support, but also in improving those things as well. Are my students and those in the profession worth living and worth dying for? And it seems to me the outcome of teacher diversity, however we want to sort of think about that, under some new covenants and in a community that loves all of us, is that important. And the young people, I think, today and beyond deserve no less from us. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your attention, and I hope we might have a minute or two for some questions and comments afterwards. Thank you. So are there things you want to talk more about? Yes, sir.
I unfortunately have to record. I'm going to mentor another student.
All right then.
But
Do your work.
I want to tell my former students I thoroughly enjoyed sitting in your classroom today.
Oh, bless your heart. Thank you. Thank you. And that's a real bless your heart, not that one that we often use in the South. That was a real bless your heart. I meant that. Yeah, I meant that. I appreciate you. Other thoughts, musings? Yes. Doctor Gardner.
Thank you, Dr. Dillard.
You're welcome.
This is on floor because earlier I was having a similar conversation, and now you've shown me just how to have the conversation that my committee was raising with me. And I'm thinking about your last point. My students and those in the profession are worth living for and worth dying for.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering the role of administration in the worth living and dying for. And I'm thinking about, we recently had a graduate student strike, and this particular college did not release a letter of support for its students. So then what does that look like if my students, those in the profession, are worth living and dying, worth dying for?
Well, one thing, you've already mentioned one thing, right? This idea that there are political stances that need to be taken by administrators, but there's even within the constructs of a university, sometimes those things have to happen. But the consequence, and every move we make in those positions, having held a number of them myself, are always fraught with this sort of, okay, I'm gonna make a decision here, and I'm gonna land on this side or I'm gonna land on that side. I may be without a job, but my dad always used to tell me, you were looking for a job when you found this one. And so it helps me to be able to make maybe some decisions to speak in times where others might not, because I was looking for a job when I found this one. So for me right now, what that space looks like, and I'm an administrator for 84 more days. I count it down every day. But what it looks like now for me in these moments is less, at least at Georgia, less about speaking and more about supporting. So I'll give you an example. Our students, Georgia is a very interesting institution. We like things pretty. We don't like conflicts. We don't like things out of place. We don't like problems. And the institution itself will do everything to make sure that that doesn't happen. Nothing is awry on campus. So part of the work becomes helping people, I'm thinking of your words, Tori, helping people understand that they're not nuts. when they know something's wrong, but yet the institution is assuming that it's not. And so I'm finding myself spending a lot more time in conversations with folks like, you're not crazy, that is unreasonable, this is happening, whatever it might be. So I find myself in those kinds of conversations more so than speaking back to the context of the institution. I don't know if that makes sense. But I think that's what it looks like for me right now. But I think there have been times in the past where it has looked quite differently. It has meant being out there in the streets with students. It has been meant being that person who writes that letter. It's meant taking your faculty through the hate you give, even against the wishes of the dean himself. It's those kinds of things. But I think one of the things that I would ask folks to recognize is that sometimes administrators are doing things that you don't have any idea they're doing. And I think part of the challenge is that as administrators, we have to be much more careful and adept at telling folks the work that we're doing, sharing those backstories. I just wrote a piece actually for Qualitative Inquiry. Y'all need to read it, it's pretty fabulous. But it actually is a piece for graduate students and emerging scholars to recognize that any article that you publish has probably gone through a whole lot of stuff behind the scenes. And it may have something to do with the relevance and quality of the article, and it may have everything to do with the politics of what's around it. And so this was following a particular piece of scholarship that didn't make it into the journal that I wanted it to be in because of some of those politics. And the unfortunate part was that I got to know those things over time from the editors and from the place where it eventually got to. And so I told that story to let folks know, look, just because it looks pretty now doesn't mean that there wasn't a whole lot of ugly on the other side. So I think that's the other piece. As administrators, we've got to get better at saying, I didn't speak back to this, but here are the other things that have also been going on. Here are the other places where I've tried to advocate and recognize that my advocacy might not look like what it is that you imagine it should look like. I also think it points to a really important conversation that needs to happen between the elders and the young ones. We were talking about this last night, that many of us who have gotten to this point in our academic careers haven't figured out how to exit the stage yet. And we need to. Because the skills, I'm not talking about you, Dr. Anderson. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the talents that these young people bring to the work that are not the same skill set that I had or have. And that part of the legacy, I think part of a fine legacy, is learning when that baton needs to be passed to that next generation so that those skills that are necessary for this moment can be marshaled. Like I said, I'm on Twitter, but I don't know what I'm doing. But I have students who use that media so incredibly to teach, to learn, to do research, they're just doing all kinds of stuff. We were laughing last night at dinner about somebody paying with their phone. I'm like, why do you do that? I don't even know how you do that. So I'm just saying, I think it's an unfortunate part of growing up in the West, because I think most places in the rest of the world have traditions for how things are passed on. They have a moment at which that pass happens. And there's a set of rituals around which that pass happens. I watch it happen all the time in Ghana. I'm a part of it in many places in my role as a Queen Mother. But we don't have those things here. So many of us are still here like, why are we? Okay, now we're supposed to look like we're running to tenure. We need to have a set of roles that elders play in a community. And we need to figure out when we should pass that baton. My dad my dad was a smart man. Ooh. But he's a teacher as well, high school teacher. And he said, when I start to hate kids, that's what I need to stop teaching, right? And we saw it happen, because he started hating those kids. And I'm like, Daddy, it's time for you to stop. You need to go retire. You don't like them anymore. And I think that somehow we've got to figure, for each one of us, we've got to figure out when that moment is, right? When the moment is where I do not like the work that I'm doing, or I'm struggling to stay relevant in this particular moment. That's the moment where I go sit on the porch and I invite folks to come. And if you want to come, fine. And if you don't want to come, that's okay too. But I don't need to be in the center anymore. But I do need you to step up. And I need you to have had enough tools to be able to step up. And that's the work for me of mentoring people like Dr. Ruth Nicole in the back, or Dr. Bettina Love. And that's because I need to know that things are going to be okay, because I'm going to sit on the porch. So I need to know it's going to be okay, and particularly for that next generation of scholars who are coming through. Those scholars have a set of tools that I don't have to work with this generation of scholars. Now, I got something to tell them, yeah, but some of the tools that they need, I don't have. And so, yeah, I don't even know how I got there, but go ahead.
Two questions I have.
Yeah.
One, if you could elaborate a little bit more. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the panel as well. I guess I would want you to, if you wouldn't mind, elaborating a little bit more on what does it mean for senior administrators or faculty, or even people who have been, graduate students for a while and they've moved on to being assistant professors.
Sure.
So that process in and of itself, for me as a grad student, I think can also sort of narrow you down, right? So you start out here, you being, I want to change.
Sure.
The process, right, has a way of sort of like reining you in.
Sure.
So for now, you need to be quiet. For now, you need to put your head down and just do your work. So what does it mean to think about that, and if what we're doing is relevant, right, for this moment? What's that work that the individual has to go through? Yes, I might be over here doing that, but is it relevant to the body of students that are here today? Right? So yeah, you can come to me and say behind the scenes I'm doing X, Y, and Z, but is it relevant for today's experience, right? Where students are today, or is it an archaic model? So that's one thing. And then my second question is, could you speak a little bit more about, and I'm not sure if you fully did, this idea of designing for liberation, right,
Sure.
and justice. What does that look like? What are we thinking about? What are we taking into consideration when we're doing that kind of work?
Let me try to remember these questions, because I'm listening to you going, yeah. So archaic models of administrators and whether they're relevant for today's moment. I think the expectation that I think certainly we should expect administrators to be responsive to current situations. But I also think it's unrealistic to expect that administrators who've been doing work for a while are going to do it the way you would. But I also think it's incumbent upon those of us who are elders to find young people who can inform us about what's necessary. So those of you who know Tina Love, Nicole mentioned her. Tina's like my, she's like my young mentor. I don't know how you do that, but she's the person who helps me understand what I'm not seeing, my blind spots, what's necessary, right? And I think that's the wisdom of elders. I don't have to know how to move that rock, but I do need to know how to ask that young man to move that rock for me, right? That's what my skill set can do. So I think that's part of it. We can't expect that administrators who know everything respond the way we necessarily want them to. It's our responsibility then to talk back to them, isn't it? But we also, if we're smart administrators, we will find young people who can inform the work we're doing and do it better to help us understand what's necessary at that moment. So I don't know if that helps a little bit. So I need an advisory council of young people, who from all different kinds of walks of lives, who can help me understand what I'm seeing, because I'm seeing what I'm seeing, but I don't know. So that's what I think I would have to do for me personally. Now to your second question, the question about designing for liberation. I'd like to think that I've been doing that all my career. I'd like to think that. Because liberation for me, or that audacious freedom, is something about being able to do the work that you were sent here to do, right? Not somebody else's work, not the work of your advisor, not anyone else's work, but what you were divinely appointed to do. So by design, as a teacher, and I think of myself most often as a teacher, although I'm a researcher, but I'm a teacher at my core, it means that I've got to design spaces that are both open and bounded, right? That include, that have diversity and equity at the center of that. That inquiry drives that work. Inquiry, like wanting to know something more. And that at the end of the day, we get to that place where because of those pursuits, because of that individual work, you can actually create something. So when I think about a syllabus designed for a class, for example, and I'm thinking of my own classes, although I feel like I don't teach anymore, which is horrible. So we start with these creative autobiographies. Who are you? Why did you show up here? And what is it that you're bringing into this space, and what is it that others need to know in order to support your learning? So we start there, I start there, they start there. We move into spaces where you're going to read texts and you're going to be engaged with work that you've not seen before. So if you haven't read KMT by Aikwe Armah, if you haven't read The Healers by Aikwe Armah, if you haven't read work by Latinx and Asian American, and if you haven't read work that's multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-languaged even, then we need to start there, because I need all those perspectives in order to make sense of the work that I'm to do. So it's trying to design that work that has you discussing, engaging, inquiring into questions that you care deeply about. And that somehow I can provide some boundaries around, but also some windows or doors or whatever metaphor you want to use, bridges to other places as you're wandering through that. So it's going to look different for me than it does for Dr. Brown. It's going to look different for me than it does for other folks. But something about that person's own question driving that education, it seems to me, is the most important part. So then when we say we want to recruit new students of color, new students, new faculty of color, how do we support that? If in fact the only models that we have are this narrow, the only voices that are allowed to be heard are here, the only people in that cohort are white, we can't have those conversations, not in the kind of deep, diverse way that we might. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Are we done? Yay!